Welcome to ULTI.TV. I am Stefan Rappazzo, happy to be back in the realms of Australian Ultimate once again after a small hiatus. And I am pleased to be joined with the ever knowledgeable and ever wonderful Max Halden. Max, how you doing today?
I'm very well, Steph. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. You were my first port of call when I was tasked with the job of getting some inside details of what's going on in Australian Ultimate. Max Halden was the first name that popped in my mind, so I'm very happy to have you on the line. Let's get to it. Let's get down to brass tacks. Max, tell me what have I missed? What is the state? I've been gone from Australia for 5 years, but tell me about the state of play. What's been happening the last few months specifically? We'll start there, and then maybe dive back a little further from there.
Absolutely. Well, we're obviously very lucky to be staring down the barrel of a national championships. In terms of the COVID response in Australia, we've been pretty lucky to have extremely strict rules, especially around international travel, which has allowed us to sort of get on top of the virus pretty well. And as a result, in terms of ultimate frisbee, in a lot of jurisdictions in Australia, we've been playing somewhat competitively for since probably late last year. That's obviously been interrupted in many places by short lockdowns in Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney over as well. But overall, most tournaments have still been happening. And yeah, since most teams would have done selections for nationals around January, Ellipsis included, finalized that late last year, and have been playing a few warm-up tournaments in the lead up to the big show in a week's time.
All right, big show in a week's time. So it's been a pretty liberating year, or liberal year for play over there, based on comparison anyways, even though it's been probably some restrictions, I imagine still, or some limitations compared to a normal tournament. Let's get to this year's championship. Tell us as much as you know, and this one's kind of off the top here, Max, but how many teams are at a Div 1 championship right now? I know that changed probably 4 or 5 years ago. There was like a bit more, 6 years maybe, the introduction of Div 2, the restructuring of the size. How many teams are invited? How many teams are going or qualified? What's the structure to your knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So in both divisions, Div 1 has moved to a 12-team tournament. That's been the case for 4 or 5 years now, especially since Div 2 has sort of skyrocketed in popularity. Certainly in terms of numbers, huge numbers of teams are entering Div 2 at the moment, or at least that was certainly the case pre-COVID. This year, because of restrictions, we're down to just 9 teams in the men's division. It was due to be 10, but due to an outbreak in Queensland last week, unfortunately, they've had to be excluded from the tournament, which is really disappointing for them, obviously, and definitely my heart goes out to those guys who have been training really hard and not had an opportunity to play other states yet. But we're down. That means we're down to 9 teams in the men's division, and I believe in the women's division it's slightly less. I think it's just 8. Okay. But you may need to fact check that for me. So okay. We're a little bit of a smaller group than previous years, certainly, but it should still be pretty solid competition from around the country.
Cool. Well, we may touch on the Queensland exemption, we'll call it, or restriction again. But for now, we'll talk about these 9 teams. Where does Ellipsis fall into these 9 teams? What is the? I mean, of course, I would imagine there are championship aspirations for a team like Ellipsis. I think a few teams have it. How many teams of these 9, in your opinion, Max, have a chance of being in that, let's say, Final Four of semifinal? Is this open to everyone? Is it a pretty level playing field now in a 9-team tournament, or is there some clear favorites?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's always going to be favourites, of course, but I think it's safe to say that in a 9-team tournament, really anything can happen, and it's certainly in a year that's been as disrupted as this one has been, and with so little lead up to the tournament in terms of sort of major tournaments that bring together people from around the country. Certainly safe to say that it is anyone's game. It's certainly a more level playing field than it has been in any years that I can remember. With that said, obviously, there's a few people who are sitting in the box seat. Both Sunder teams who've renamed from Colony, they will be really strong. There was a lead-up tournament about a month ago now in Canberra as well, called Canberra Cup, where we Ellipsis got to play against a lot of the teams from New South Wales and from the ACT as well, so Fishwick. And as well as some of the Victorian teams coming up. In terms of the results at that tournament, it was Sunder 1, Ellipsis 2, Sunder 3 as well. So they split XY, those two teams. So they're obviously in a pretty good position and were the highest finishers, obviously excluding Brisbane in 2019, the last full national season. So they're going to be very tough to beat, as always. You look at some of the other talent going around, it was a really mixed bag at that Canberra Cup. And as you would expect from teams that are playing each other for the very first time, some results really started moving around pretty strongly. Chile beat one of the Sun teams, but managed to lose to every other team in the tournament, basically. Fishwick, some great wins, but also had some pretty heartbreaking losses. Crank struggled a little bit with the conditions, which is maybe a surprise for a team from Hong Kong, which for those watching from outside of Australia is traditionally has some pretty wild weather amidst some other pretty nice times. But the best bit about this Nationals from my perspective is exactly how open it is, and nobody has seen Outbreak traditionally have finished outside of the top 4, traditionally outside of the top 8, but given that nobody's seen them this year, and they've got an injection of a few players like Ben Powley and others, who knows? Maybe they can come up with the goods.
Outbreak coming unannounced during a pandemic. I don't know about that. This all sounds, Max, but should be interesting. So
it could be their year for that reason,
Steph. Oh gosh, that would be something. That's a heck of a headline. Outbreak takes pandemic title. If I'm doing my math properly here, and I remember Australian Ultimate, we've got 3 Victorian teams, 3 New South Wales teams, or 4 including Canberra, ACT. So that is our 9. No, that's 3 Victoria.
Yeah, you've got Newcastle and Crank, so Wollongong. So 2 from outside of Sydney in New South Wales. Then the 2 Sydney Sunder. So that's 4. You've got Outbreak from South Australia, Fishwick from the ACT, and then 3 teams from Melbourne. So it's Chile, Heads of State, and Ellipsis, the team that I play for.
And how has the interstate play gone? Was there a regional qualifier for Victoria?
There was a regional qualifier, and we've been running what we were calling the Melbourne Cup, which is a bit of an uninventive name, but is accurate, between the teams in Melbourne, which was essentially a sort of full double round robin plus a finals day, which Ellipsis came out on top of, and we also won at regionals. So we've certainly been the best performing team from Melbourne so far. That would be followed probably by Heads of State, although Heads of State and Chile have had results go either way. So that one is potentially still an open question.
Okay.
And yeah, so it's been pretty stable down here. Yeah.
We've actually got some viewers here, Max. I'm surprised to see we
It
got
doesn't
Nicholas
surprise me at
Whitlock
all.
and Dennis Tran. They're here to
Nicholas
see.
Whitlock and Dennis Tran. If there's any two people in the universe who are going to find this stream going live, it was those two.
Well, they say, what is this? Well, this is our pre-nationals hype. We're going to, it's streaming live, but we will tidy it up and rebroadcast it on ULTI.TV. But happy that you guys are on with us for the live recording. So continuing on here, Max, we're going to get to your tournament predictions to end things off, but tell me about, like, for Australian Ultimate right now, what kind of advantage do you think you guys are getting? What kind of the fact that you are able to run a full season of training, full season of competition tournaments, you're going to a national championship when life as normal returns, should it ever, on an international stage, do you think that the Aussie, is there an advantage here, and how might that play out? What do you see? How do you see that situation on the international stage?
Yeah, sure. I think there's two sides to it. So on one hand, yes, I completely agree that the extra time and just mentally the ability to sort of get back into Frisbee and to think about that kind of really hard training and have competition, it takes a while from experience. Certainly Melbourne had a much more strict lockdown than other parts of the country. And certainly having moved from Sydney to Melbourne in the past year, I've definitely noticed that it's taken people in Victoria a lot longer to get back into that mode of really training hard and getting excited about Frisbee, thinking deeply about it, and, really getting into that mindset that you need for, a Worlds campaign or something as big as that. So I think just getting a head start on that process, I think, is actually going to be massive, especially if it's a small turnaround time for the World Championships, I guess, after sort of life starts, quote unquote, going back to normal. The only other side of it is that we do have strict international travel laws. And so I would have a concern projecting a little bit further forward that there will be a bit of a gap where internationally other teams can travel and play other countries, and Australia will not be able to do that. So we may miss a big slab of international competition, which I think could really hinder us potentially in the lead up to Worlds. So it's swings and roundabouts. I think that it would be overstating it to say we're getting a massive advantage from it. But I certainly think that people are already talking about world clubs and world games. So that, I think, really does help us a lot.
Yeah, surface level present only. It does seem an advantageous situation for the Kiwis as well. But as you say, that may come to bite you by the time the rest of the international competition is ready to start, and you may be stuck back. We'll see how it goes. But Max, my final question is, I would like you to tell us both about the Open and the women's division here. We haven't talked much about the women's, but we've got some ladies coming up that will fill us in. But I want to know your semifinalists in both divisions, and and then break it down from there. Who's gonna actually give me a top four and a champion in each division?
Sounds good. Well, I'll start with the women's. I think it's very unfortunate that Fuse is not getting an opportunity to play nationals, because I think they would definitely have been real contenders for the top four. Ellipsis down in Victoria have been completely dominant, and I get the pleasure of training alongside a lot of those women, and their play is really phenomenal, and it's just exciting to see them build. So I think they definitely will be hard to beat. I think New South Wales is a really exciting sort of area, and so it'd be great to see who pops out of there. I have to say that Rogue, the talent that they have on that team is really, really strong, and so I'd love to see them make the top four. I also think that Factory have been in from Canberra, have been really one of the untold stories of success. They really have built a great core of really excellent players, a lot of whom you would have seen on the Firetails if they'd gotten to play in 2020. And I just love their play style. It's very aggressive, like super dynamic, and they have the skills to pull it off. So I think that in the terms of that last spot in the top four, I definitely think Manly, just with the experience, you saw them come through in 2019 to be the finalists alongside Ellipsis. And so I think Manly is probably the other top four team to watch. And I'm biased, but I think Ellipsis is probably in the box seat to claim their 5th straight championships.
I mean, 4 straight in front doesn't. You don't really have to claim your bias too much on that one with 4 straight championships behind him. But as a fellow club member, there is an existing bias, so fair to say. So Ellipsis taking it over Manly, Factory, and Rogue. So that's a very Melbourne knocking off 3 Sydney-based clubs. And Rogue is down to 1 club now, is that right? They used to split, but now with the GWS and Manly, the division of player or the distribution of players has been a bit pushed to the 3 clubs particularly, rather than a mega club in Rogue.
Yeah, I think Rogue has only had a Div 1 team for a few years now. As you say, there's just been a real growing number of Div 1 teams in Sydney, which is great to see. It's almost like a flip between Melbourne and Sydney, where Sydney really has sort of one dominant men's club and many women's clubs. Melbourne is sort of the opposite, with sort of 3 men's clubs which are all competing potentially for top 4 spots. But then Ellipsis really is by far the strongest women's club. So yeah, it's nice to see a bit more diversity opening up in Sydney and some more opportunities. But it's also been an explosion of Div 2 teams, which has been really excellent just for development in that region, I think.
Awesome. And so then let's switch to your division, to the Open division. Max, we did discuss quickly the teams that are coming. We got Crank, I-Beam from up Newcastle, then Sunder. You've got Melbourne. So Ellipsis, Chile, and Heads of State, and then that leaves us with ACT, which is Fishwick, and one other.
Outbreak from South Australia.
Yes, Outbreak are the potential champions. Anyways, let's see how you line those 9 up, Max. Who's top 4 and who's number 1?
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I mean, it's as I said earlier, it is just a really challenging year, because in terms of actually seeing those other teams, we've gotten a lot less of an opportunity this. And I also think it means that the dynamics are going to be much more complex. That it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors phenomenon, where I think we'll see quite a few teams beat one, lose to another, and that will, I think, cause a little bit of could be a bit of chaos, I think, across the middle of the tournament. In terms of how I think it will shake out, I mean, obviously, I think Ellipsis are going to win the tournament. And that one is displaying my existing bias. We've been training really hard. We felt like we had a really great showing against Sunder in Canberra. And in the final, we didn't really play to our potential, but we're feeling really confident that we have the ability to win. I think both Sunder teams, really, when we played them, they did look really great. I will say, they are fragile. There is a potential to beat them, but multiple times in New South Wales regionals and at Canberra Cup, they've come back from 3 or 4 or even 5 points down right near the end of the game to clinch it. And, you know, when you've got the ability to stack a line to get yourself out of a deep hole, that can be very, very hard for other teams which are a little bit more flat to challenge. So it's going to take a big effort to knock those two off, especially if you're facing them in a do or die game. Last but not least, I'd love to see Fishwick locking out the top 4. I think over the last couple of years, similar to Factory, they've built up a really great, just as a great core of younger players who are all, been pushing up through the under-23s division and continuing to sort of play together and with the club. They're being coached by John Horan and Mish Phillips, who are 2 amazing Australian coaches. And they've also picked up a few big players. Rob de Hollander, who you would be familiar with, Steph, the big man.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Mikey Trong, who is who was previously playing for Heads of State. So yeah, I definitely think I would love to see them crack the top 4. It's a big ask, but AJ's still around and at the helm. So he can potentially pull them through at the right moment. But yeah.
All right, so there's the 4, and you started with the winner being Ellipsis. I think there's potential. A lot of great points there, Max. I think Sydney do have such a pedigree of winning that they know how to turn it on when, especially when their backs are up against the wall. Tough to even put their backs up against the wall, but even tougher to beat them when they're there. That fight's not over until it's over. So all said, I firstly thank you for being here, taking your time. I know it's your Sunday evening. I'm in Amsterdam here, so it's my Sunday morning. It's great to connect. Max, an ex-teammate of mine, an ex-player of mine. We have a wonderful history. He took on my tradition of winning the halibut for a short while, and then he let it go a year ago, as I heard. But all things said, a wonderful pleasure to see your face, to hear your voice, and to have you on with me today, Max. Thank you very much for joining.
My pleasure, Steph. Always great to chat to you. And I can't wait till when you get to interview me in person at the next Australian Nationals.
Yes, it will happen. I'm coming back. We're going to be there. Thanks again, Max. Make sure you share, subscribe, and do all the good things for ULTI.TV, and we will be back with more interviews soon.